Hi, my name is Olivia Carter. I am 32 years old, and I work as a marketing manager for a fashion brand in New York City. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, in a middle-class family. My father, Richard Carter, was a high school teacher, and my mother, Laura Carter, was a nurse. I have one younger brother, Daniel, who is now an engineer in California. Growing up, I always believed in love. The kind of love where two people support each other, where a man protects his woman, and a woman stands beside her man through every storm. My parents had a strong marriage, and I always wanted the same. I thought I had found it when I met Ethan Reynolds. He was charming, successful, and had a way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I thought I was the luckiest girl. But today, sitting in my small apartment in Brooklyn, I regret everything. How it all began, I met Ethan when I was 26. He was 30, working as a financial analyst in a prestigious firm. We met at a mutual friends party, and from the moment we started talking, I felt an instant connection. He was confident, funny, and had a way of making me feel special. We started dating, and within a year, he proposed. At that time, I thought I had won the lottery in love. I remember how my friends were envious, telling me how lucky I was to find a man like him, handsome, financially stable, and romantic. My family adored him too. My father once told me, "Olivia, he's a good man. I see the way he looks at you. He will take care of you." And I believed it. We got married in a beautiful ceremony in Boston. I was the happiest bride. I dreamed of a life filled with love, laughter, and adventures. But the reality was far from my dreams. The change after marriage, the first few months were wonderful. We traveled, we laughed, and we planned our future. But slowly, small things started changing. At first, I ignored them, thinking they were normal adjustments in marriage. But looking back, I realized those were the first signs of trouble. Ethan started coming home late. At first, he said it was work, and I believed him. But then, he started becoming distant. He wasn't the same man who used to call me beautiful every morning or surprise me with flowers. His patience wore thin, and small arguments turned into big fights. I remember the first time he raised his voice at me. It was over something silly. I forgot to buy his favorite brand of coffee. "You can't even do a simple thing right," he snapped. His words stung, but I brushed it off. "He's just stressed from work," I told myself. But it didn't stop. The criticism became constant. "You spend too much money on useless things," he'd say when I bought something for myself. "Why don't you dress better?" he'd comment when we went out. It was as if nothing I did was good enough. Emotional neglect. I started feeling lonely in my own marriage. Ethan was physically present, but emotionally absent. We barely had conversations anymore. Whenever I tried to talk about my feelings, he'd dismiss me. "You're overreacting, Olivia," he'd say. "Stop being so dramatic." The man who once made me feel loved now made me feel invisible. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was expecting too much. But deep down, I knew. Love shouldn't feel like this. The lies and betrayal. One evening, I found a text message on his phone. It was from a woman named Nicole. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My hands trembled as I read it. My heart pounded in my chest. I confronted Ethan that night. "Who is Nicole?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His reaction was cold. "Just a colleague," he said, snatching his phone away. "You're being paranoid again." But I knew the truth. I felt it. And a week later, I found out everything. Ethan had been seeing Nicole for months. The late nights, the distance, the change in his behavior. It all made sense now. I felt broken, betrayed. The man I had trusted, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, had been lying to me all along. The decision to leave. I wish I could say I walked away that night, but I didn't. I stayed. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, he'd change. I wanted to believe that our love was worth fighting for, but Ethan never changed. He apologized, said it was a mistake, but his actions never matched his words. The emotional abuse continued. He manipulated me into thinking it was my fault, that I wasn't enough. One night, after yet another argument, I sat alone in our bedroom, crying. That was the moment I realized I had lost myself. I was no longer the happy, confident woman I used to be. I was living in a marriage that was slowly destroying me. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I packed my bags and left. Life after Ethan. The divorce was painful, but it was necessary. I moved to Brooklyn, started therapy, and focused on healing. It wasn't easy. There were nights I questioned my decision. As I sit here in my Brooklyn apartment, sipping on a warm cup of tea, I think about how far I've come. 2 years ago, I was a broken woman, trapped in a marriage that drained me, doubting my worth, questioning my decisions. But today, I'm free. I'm healing. And for the first time in years, I'm learning to love myself again. But healing is not a straight road. There were days when I missed Ethan, not because I wanted him back, but because I missed the idea of who I thought he was. There were nights when loneliness crept in, whispering that maybe I should have fought harder, tried longer. But then I'd remind myself of the pain, the neglect, the betrayal. I didn't just leave Ethan, I saved myself from him. Starting over after the divorce, I threw myself into work. My job at the fashion brand became my escape, my safe space. I worked late hours, took on new projects, and even got promoted. But work, no matter how fulfilling, wasn't enough to fill the emptiness inside me. So, I started therapy. It was difficult at first, digging through the pain, revisiting old wounds, accepting uncomfortable truths. My therapist, Julia, was a kind woman in her 50s who had a way of making me see things from a new perspective. "You didn't fail, Olivia," she once told me. "You learned. You grew. You left when you realized you deserved better. That's not failure. That's courage." Her words stayed with me. I also started journaling, pouring my emotions onto paper. It helped me make sense of everything, to see that my pain was real, but so was my strength. I wrote letters to my past self, to the scared woman who stayed in that toxic marriage, reminding her that she was enough, that she deserved more. Slowly, I began reclaiming my life. Trusting again. For the longest time, the idea of love scared me. How could I ever trust another man after what Ethan did to me? How could I ever believe in love again? I told myself I didn't need love, that I was fine on my own, and in many ways, I was. But deep down, I knew that while I was strong enough to stand alone, I didn't want to live a life without love. Love itself wasn't the problem. Ethan was. It took me a long time to separate the two. Then, one evening, as I was leaving work, I bumped into someone, literally. I had been checking my phone when I walked straight into a man, nearly dropping my coffee. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said, flustered. He laughed, a deep, warm sound. "It's okay. I needed a coffee stain on my shirt today." I looked up and met his eyes. Hazel with a hint of green. He had a kind face, with a smile that reached his eyes. "I'm Olivia," I said, almost without thinking. "James," he replied, holding out his hand. It was a small moment, but something about it felt different. Safe. Taking it slow, James worked in advertising, and as fate would have it, our offices were just a few blocks apart. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other, at the cafe, on the subway, even at a bookstore once. We started talking, then texting, then meeting up for coffee. James was different from Ethan in every possible way. He listened when I spoke, never dismissed my feelings. He made me laugh, not in a forced way, but in the kind of way that made my heart feel light again. But I was scared. One night, as we sat in a quiet little restaurant in Manhattan, he reached for my hand. "Olivia, I like you," he said, his voice gentle. "But I need to know, are you ready for this? Because I don't want to rush you." I swallowed hard. "I don't know, James. I want to be, but I don't want to get hurt again." He squeezed my hand. "Then we take it slow. No pressure. Just us, figuring things out." No man had ever said that to me before. Learning to love again, James kept his word. He never rushed me, never made me feel like I had to be anything other than myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt valued. One evening, after months of dating, we took a walk along the Brooklyn Bridge. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, the city lights just beginning to twinkle. "Do you still regret marrying him?" James asked softly. I thought about it. Did I? "No," I finally said, "because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have learned what love isn't. And I wouldn't have met you." He smiled, pulling me into his arms. "Then maybe some regrets lead us exactly where we're meant to be." And for the first time in years, I believed that maybe, just maybe, love could heal me after all. Finding my own happiness. After that night on the Brooklyn Bridge, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about James or love. It was about me. For so long, I had let my past define me, let the pain shape how I saw myself. But I didn't want to be the woman who regretted her past anymore. I wanted to be the woman who survived it, who learned from it, who grew despite it. So I started focusing on myself. I took weekend trips alone, rediscovered old hobbies, and even picked up painting again, something I had given up while I was married to Ethan. I surrounded myself with people who made me feel good, who supported me without conditions. James was still in my life, but I was careful not to make him my whole world. He understood. He never pressured me, never asked me to move faster than I was ready for. Instead, he just showed up, consistently, patiently, lovingly. One evening, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, he looked over at me and smiled. "You're happy," he said simply. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Running into Ethan again, I thought I had moved on from my past. I thought I had healed. But then, one afternoon, fate decided to test me. I was at a cafe near my office, waiting for my coffee, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Olivia?" I turned, and there he was. "Ethan." I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years. He looked different, thinner, a little worn out. His once proud expression was softer, almost hesitant. "Hey," I said, my voice steady. He let out a nervous chuckle. "Wow, you look amazing." I nodded politely, unsure of what to say. The old me would have felt anxious, emotional, but the woman standing here now, she felt nothing but calm. "How have you been?" he asked. "I'm doing well," I said honestly. "Life is good." He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Olivia, for everything. I messed up. I know I did." I took a deep breath. I had waited for this moment for so long, for him to acknowledge his mistakes, to apologize. But now that it was here, I realized something surprising. I didn't need his apology anymore. "I appreciate that, Ethan," I said, "but I don't need it. I've moved on." He looked up at me, something like regret in his eyes. "Do you ever think about us? About what we had?" I smiled, But it wasn't the smile of a woman still in pain. It was the smile of a woman who had outgrown her past. "No, Ethan," I said. "I think about what I learned, and I'm grateful for that." I grabbed my coffee, gave him one last nod, and walked away. A new chapter that night. I told James about running into Ethan. "Did it bother you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not at all. If anything, it reminded me of how far I've come." He smiled, reaching for my hand. "I'm proud of you, Olivia." And for the first time in years, I was proud of myself too, because I had learned that regret doesn't have to define you. Pain doesn't have to control you, and the past doesn't have to hold you back. I had once regretted marrying Ethan, but now I saw it differently. I didn't regret it anymore, because that chapter, no matter how painful, had led me here. To healing, to growth, to love, to myself. Truly letting go days passed after my unexpected encounter with Ethan, and surprisingly, I didn't dwell on it. I didn't replay our conversation in my head or wonder what could have been. That part of my life was over, and I had finally closed the door without any lingering emotions. One evening, as James and I walked through Central Park, he turned to me and asked, "If you could go back in time and change one thing about your marriage with Ethan, would you?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. Number A's painful as it was, it made me who I am today. If I hadn't gone through that, I might have never learned what I truly deserve. James nodded, squeezing my hand. "I love the person you are now. Strong, self-aware, and fearless." His words touched me because for so long I hadn't seen myself that way. I had seen myself as a woman who made mistakes, who stayed too long, who lost herself. But now I saw myself differently. I was a woman who survived. A new beginning months passed, and life felt lighter. I started spending more time with my family, strengthening my relationship with my younger sister Emily, who had always been my biggest supporter. She had been there during my darkest moments, reminding me of my worth when I had forgotten it. "You're glowing these days," she said one afternoon as we had lunch together. I smiled, stirring my iced coffee. "I think I'm finally at peace with my past." Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You deserve happiness, Olivia. And if James makes you happy, don't be afraid to open your heart again." Her words lingered in my mind for days. James had been patient, never pushing me, always letting me set the pace. But I knew he loved me. I saw it in the way he looked at me, in the way he listened, in the way he never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to love again, saying yes to love. One evening, James and I sat on my rooftop, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth. "Olivia, do you ever think about the future?" he asked. I took a deep breath, my heart racing slightly. "I do," I admitted, "and for the first time in years, it doesn't scare me." A slow smile spread across his face. "I love you, Olivia. I don't expect you to say it back if you're not ready, but I just wanted you to know." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had been nothing but kind, patient, and understanding, the man who had shown me what love should feel like, and suddenly the words came easily. "I love you too, James." His eyes lit up, and before I knew it, he pulled me into his arms, holding me close. At that moment, I knew I had finally let go of the past. I had finally embraced the love I deserved, and I had no regrets.